In today's video, we're going to talk about the top 5 myths about divorce. Welcome back to Life Restored. My name is Brandon, and this is a resource to help educate you through the divorce process, organize your finances along the way, and help prepare you for the next step of your life. If this is something that resonates with you, don't forget to subscribe down below, hit the notification bell so we'll be right there in front of you every time we put out some new content, and let's get started with today's topic. Alright, so myth number 1. If you have not worked during the marriage, or if your spouse has not worked during the marriage, you will have to receive or pay alimony for your entire life. This is not always true. It's going to depend on the certain circumstances that you and your spouse have been in. Have your spouse been working for the whole time? Have they had any kind of background with work or any experience in the workforce? These are going to be some of the things that come into play when the attorney and the judge are kind of working through dictating on what type of alimony you're going to have to pay or receive. There's several different types of alimony that you can actually pay or receive, and the first one being temporary. So with temporary alimony or spousal support, it's going to be during the divorce process itself. So when you're going through divorce, if you haven't been working and you can't support yourself, or on the other hand, if your spouse hasn't been working and they can't support themselves, you may have to pay or receive alimony during that time to help pay those bills during the divorce process itself. Now, rehabilitative is the next type of alimony, and that is actually exactly how it sounds. Rehabilitative spousal support or alimony is so one of the spouses or the other can actually rehabilitate themselves and actually get themselves back ready to be in the workforce. So whether that means there's a certain amount of time that they have to be in education, so going back to school for 2-4 years, or is it going to be something just like a technical program that only takes a few months? But that is going to pretty much cover them or cover you while either of you go back into the workforce. The next is actually, most of the time it's the longest one, and it's actually permanent. During permanent alimony or spousal support, it's a dictated time that the judge has awarded alimony, and what it is, it goes over the longest period of time. Usually it will end under a couple different circumstances. Whether if you're receiving alimony or you're paying alimony, whether the spouse that you're paying to or receives passes away or gets remarried. And those are going to be the couple times that actually will go away. The alimony is not typically for life because of that. So sometimes if people have moved on, they've gotten remarried, that alimony will end up stopping at that point. The next is reimbursement alimony or spousal support. Like, say for instance, you're the one going back to school, or you're gaining the experience to go back into the workforce and earn your own income, or if your spouse is doing the same, you may have to either pay them back for the certain costs that it took to get ready for that time, paying for those classes, paying for the school, or if you're the one going back, then you will potentially receive that same kind of alimony. So going back over, the myth is you will receive alimony for life. Actually, several different types of alimony are only for certain time periods, with the longest time period being the permanent alimony, but that one will not always be for the rest of your life. If you fall in love and you marry someone else, or if potentially you or your spouse pass away, that alimony will end as well. So let's get right on into the next one. Alright, so myth number 2. If your ex ran up the credit card debt or ran up some debt, they are the only ones responsible for paying it back. So this is going to largely depend on which state you live in and some other different factors. But there's this thing called community property states. And if you live in a community property state, you will be on the hook for the debt that your spouse ran up. So the way that the community property state works is they look at you and your spouse or ex-spouse as being one. So both of you are going to be held on the hook for this debt. Now, if you're not in a community property state, then you may not be in the hook for this particular debt, and it's most likely that you won't be but there are some exceptions. So just keep that in mind and consult with your attorney. If you're not in a community property state, am I going to be responsible to cover the debt that they recklessly went out and ran up? So there are some other exceptions to this as well. So if you were to acquire credit card debt, or your spouse were to run up credit card debt before you were married, then most likely you will not be responsible to take over that debt or be responsible to pay back the debt that they ran up prior to your marriage. All right, so myth number 3. If your ex-spouse committed adultery during the marriage, then you will receive a more favorable divorce settlement. Now, this may not be the case because in most states, there's a no-fault divorce law. And what that means is that they are not looking at why the two of you are getting divorced. They don't so much care, or that doesn't play as much of a factor of how the outcome of the divorce is going to happen. So they don't look at the reasons that you're getting divorced. So with that being said, don't go ahead and play into, hey, they did this to me, I'm going to win the divorce, I'm going to take the majority of the assets, because that's not always the case. Now you may, depending on how other factors play into it, but this specific factor is not going to determine how the outcome of the divorce happens in most states. All right, so myth number 4, the house is always the biggest asset at stake during the divorce process. And this is not always the case, because sometimes it is and sometimes it's not. There are other alternative items that you need to bring into play during this time. So do you have individual retirement accounts? Do you have company 401ks and things like that that will actually be a larger sum? Do you or your spouse own businesses? Are those evaluations of the business larger than what the house is worth? Now, there are many times that you have sentimental attachments to the house. You may want to keep the house for that specific reason of, hey, this is where my kids grew up. This is where we have memories, and I want to hold on to that. But sometimes it's actually not the most beneficial financially. So if you're ready for a clean slate, make sure that you evaluate the value of the house, the retirement accounts, and other assets like that to determine what is going to be the best settlement or the best arrangement for you moving forward with the divorce. All right, so last but not least, myth number 5, all of the money in the bank account will be yours once the marriage is over. This is not always the case either, because some of the assets, depending on what state you're in, will be considered 50-50 if you're in that community property state. Everything will be divided right down the middle as ownership during the marriage. Now, there is a couple exceptions to this. If you received an inheritance, or if your spouse received an inheritance during the marriage, inheritance is actually considered a sole property separate from the marital property. Now, there are some exceptions. If the inheritance is used in a joint account to pay for marital expenses, if you are to take some of the inheritance and put it into the house, doing updates and things like that, or if you were to purchase a house using the inheritance money, it can lose that sole property status and then become a marital property. So just keep those things in mind, that not only is this money separated between the two of you in most states, in the community property states, but just because there's money in the account does not mean it's yours, even if your name is the only name on the account. All right, thanks for joining in today on today's video. And if you like what we had to say today, don't forget to drop us a like down below. Subscribe to our channel, because every week we're going to be coming out with new content to try to help you guys out during this time. And we also have a free resource for you. If you're in the beginning stages of your divorce, you need help trying to organize your finances, gather all the proper documentation, we're going to leave a link down below in the description. It's a free documents checklist. You can grab your copy, and we are excited to see you in the next video.